The Adult Ballet Studio is a podcast featuring conversations with the empowering voices of the adult ballet community, a world where passion has no limits and dreams can take flight. My name's Elizabeth Blossfield, and I'm an adult ballet dancer and your host. Welcome to the studio. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Adult Ballet Studio. Today on this podcast, we have Jess Spinner, former pro dancer turned health, wellness, and lifestyle coach for dancers. She's the founder of The Whole Dancer, a platform where she seeks to transform the way dancers approach health, body image, and self-worth, both inside and outside of the studio. Jess is a lifelong dancer, but says her professional career ended partly because of an injury and partly because she never worked through a disordered relationship with food and her body. In 2009, while she was still dancing, she became one of Whole Foods Market's first healthy eating specialists, trained in Nutritarian Plant Based Nutrition. In 2013, she became a holistic health coach through the Institute for Integrative Nutrition and eventually founded her platform, The Whole Dancer. Through this platform, she's worked with aspiring and professional dancers around the world, as well as retired dancers, adult ballet students, and dance teachers. And she realized something in the process, that true success in dance doesn't come from perfection, but from balance, well-being, and self-compassion. Now, through The Whole Dancer, Jess is empowering dancers to build healthy habits, heal their relationship with food, and finally feel confident in their bodies without sacrificing their dreams. I was so excited to talk to her. Just as a heads up, this episode addresses body image, weight, and diet culture and disordered eating. Okay, let's hear from Jess. Hi, Jess. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Good. Yeah, thanks for taking the time to do this. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
I know that we connected on social media a while back, and I love the work that you're doing. And it's also your 10-year anniversary, right, with The Whole Dancer, because you founded it in 2015. Yeah. So, for any of our listeners who aren't familiar with you and some of the work that you do, could you just give kind of a brief intro?
Yeah, so I support both pre-professional and professional dancers, and then I also work with adult dancers to find a balanced approach to all things dance, life, food, and body.
I love the work that you do. And you've said before that it's not just about food. It's really about how dancers, are moving outside of the studio and sort of the life that they've created around their training and their professional career. So how do you see wellness in the studio sort of making its way out into our everyday lives and vice versa as well? What do we bring back to the studio?
Yeah, I think there's so much to be created in terms of perspective from the way you spend your time outside of the studio. I think that a lot of dancers fall into this pattern of making everything about their lives focused on ballet. And, even in younger years in your training, sometimes that's the message. Like, if you want to be good at this, or if you want to do this well, you have to eat, sleep, breathe, dance. That's all you should be thinking about. There's no time or space for other interests. I would say some teachers finally have begun to evolve beyond that. But, that was always the message that I received, was like, to be good at this, it has to be your everything. And I think there's so much to be gained by creating a life outside of dance that is very whole and fulfilling and joyful. And that experience outside of the studio brings so much more to what you're able to provide and create inside the studio. And then when you're there, when you're actually dancing, I think that things don't always go well. Like we know that, right? Like, you have this idea in your head of how you want the variation to look or how you hope even just class will go and how you want to feel. But we all have off days, and it's a very real experience to be in the studio and to be feeling like, gosh, this is not how I thought this day was going to go. And when it's your everything, it can feel like the end of the world. Whereas when it's part of your life and not the only thing that you're focused on, you can say, okay, this is not a great day, but it doesn't mean that it's going to stay this way. And when I'm working with a dancer, what I encourage them to do is, what did go well? Like about each individual combination, what actually went well in that combination, even if overall you were like, it's not my best, because you can usually come away with something like, okay, I maintained some good port de bras, even though, I wasn't fully on my leg, but I kept my arms strong and where they needed to be, so finding ways focus on the aspects of the dance experience that are actually going well can help you get through a class that's maybe not your best and feel more balanced in that experience as well.
And I think that's so great because, I had one of those classes yesterday. My turns just weren't turning, my legs weren't working. And, it's so easy to fixate on those things. I never think, in my head, oh, well, what did I do that I really liked in that combination? And so I think that's important for dancers and to just sort of find that balance of life outside of ballet too. And I know that you sort of guide dancers in your coaching through a 7-step process. Can you talk about that process and some of the resources that you offer?
Yeah, there's so much that is involved to find balance as a dancer. We feel body pressure, like even the adult dancers who I work with who might not be pursuing this at a professional level. Being in a studio, moving and seeing yourself in a mirror can lead to feelings of uncertainty and sort of like questioning your body as well. But there are so many parts that really do go together. For me, part of it is the approach to food, of course, and finding a balanced and non-restrictive approach. Part of it is connecting to your body in positive ways. Part of it is creating ease in your food choices so that it's not something you're overthinking or overanalyzing. Creating a life outside of dance and, creating self-care practices that support you to feel your best is a really big aspect of what I think helps dancers to get to a place where they don't just tolerate their bodies, but they can actually appreciate and love them. And I think, a lot of people who work on body image will say with anyone, whether it's dancers or anyone else, will say like body neutrality can be the end goal. And while I think it's a great step, I believe very strongly that we all can get to a place where we actually love ourselves and our bodies. And I think that is the place where, we can cope with those moments of questioning our bodies or our appearance and not get lost in them. And so I guess I aim a little higher on that front. But all of these things really work together, and it's creating a space for dancers to find for themselves where their place of balance actually is. And I'll say too, for each of us, the amount of energy or focus that we need in each area really varies. So some dancers will come to me and a lot of dancers think that the food is their primary concern. Like, oh, I'm not fueling myself right. Or I need help, with the timing of my food choices or what I'm eating or how I'm putting together my meals or my meal planning strategies. And in a lot of cases, they're eating well and fueling themselves well, but it's much more about their relationship to the food and how they're thinking about it. And that's a much bigger aspect of this for many dancers than what we even realize. But, it's giving them the space to truly speak openly about what they're experiencing and thinking and feeling about it in order to uncover that and in order to uncover which area they need to focus on first or most.
And this is such important work. And I want to get, more into that food aspect as well, because I think that's huge in the dance space. But I wanted to go back to something you said, because this is a new term for me, body neutrality. And I was wondering if you could explain that a little bit. So it basically just means this idea that you're not thinking about your body at all. And you're saying that, we should aim higher. We should be thinking about it, but in a positive way. Is that right?
Yeah, it's, kind of like if you were to walk the scale of body image, you can be in a place where you have a negative body image, right? And then pretty much the next step after that would be to be neutral, where you don't judge it negatively, but you don't necessarily see it in a positive light either. You're just like, my body is my body. Beyond that, right, to get to a place where you feel positive associations with your body is a step. And then even further is, body image resilience, which is where we'll have moments of not feeling great about our bodies. And when we're in those moments, we're able to get ourselves out of them. And I think a big part of what helps to get yourself out of that place is to remember, or to first acknowledge and then remember, like, what can I love about myself? And what about my body is something to celebrate? So it's kind of like, yeah, I do think, like I said, it is, I do believe it's aiming higher than just saying like, meh, I'm not negative or positive about it.
Thanks for explaining that. And I want to learn more about how you sort of got into this work in the first place and kind of go back to the beginning, because I know before founding The Whole Dancer, you were a professional dancer yourself. Mm-hmm. So what was your first introduction to ballet, or what got you sort of into it initially?
That's a good question, because I think I need to ask my mother, like, what a lot of dancers will say like, oh yeah, like I didn't stop moving, so my mom put me in ballet. I kind of think my mom put both my sister and I in dance. My sister had no interest in it, but then when she put me in it, I was like pretty much all about it from the beginning. But I started in a studio that was, ballet, tap, jazz combo kind of classes, so like it was literally 30 minutes of each, and you would go once a week for 90 minutes. But I loved it. And then, I always loved learning the dances for the recital and things like that. And I loved performing and I loved being on stage. And then the studio owner at that school said to me around 12, I think you should go somewhere else where they have a focus on ballet, because she knew that I loved that the most. And I do have bendy feet and hyperextension. So I'm sure she also saw those assets and said, maybe going elsewhere would be a benefit to you. That was like the start of it.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's great that she noticed that in you and kind of gave you that challenge to push yourself a little harder. And when was the moment after that you decided you really wanted to pursue ballet professionally?
It was probably that summer when I did the summer intensive at my new ballet school, or so like the following summer. One of our teachers like sat us down and gave a talk basically about the pursuit of dance at a professional level and kind of what it looked like at that time and her own trajectory and things like that. And adding to that, I started getting to see New York City Ballet perform occasionally. And that was a life-changing experience where I was like, this is like the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And I just had that desire to be a part of it and to be on stage. Like I said, that was really one of my favorite things about dancing was performing and learning that was actually a career path, which I don't know if I actually knew that it was a job before those experiences,
It sounds like there are so many career highlights, getting to perform on stage and getting just, immersed in the culture of ballet. I know you've also spoken about your life as a professional dancer and some of the struggles with, body image and food choices, which is so common, in the professional dance world. So what were some of those challenges that you encountered and how did you sort of go about working through those mental and physical struggles?
Yeah. So the first one is not an uncommon experience where it's connected to puberty. And I think a lot of dancers have a life-changing experience around that time. And this is something I've spoken about because still to this day, hearing about things that are happening currently and reflecting on my own experience, it's like, and I teach ballet now too. So I know that it's not all ballet teachers, but it's like some ballet teachers seem to forget that in your teenage years, your body is supposed to change. And like for some people, you'll go from being a long and lanky 12-year-old to a woman with curves and like, hips and breasts. And like, why are we surprised by that? It should be expected. But so I, had gone away. It was the first year I went away to a summer intensive. And, I was dancing more than I ever had before. So my body needed the fuel, but I gained weight over that summer. And then I look at a picture of me from like the final performance of that summer. And I'm like, I gained weight, but like, it doesn't look like anything is bad, nothing bad about it. But I went home, and when I was back at my home studio, my ballet teacher tapped me on the thigh and said, I was just sitting outside of class. I wasn't even in class yet. I was sitting outside and she tapped my thigh and she said, that wasn't there before. And I do know that I felt shame in that moment. Like I had done something wrong and something was wrong with me now. And I didn't say anything about it to my mother or anyone. But I decided that I needed to go on a diet. And so, I was 14 at the time. And then I lost weight. As I moved forward, there was really, especially in my full-time dance environments, I never had another experience until later where someone directly said anything to me about my body. But it was always in my head from that point forward, and I would look in the mirror and look at my legs and I would think, these are not right for ballet. Like, always, regardless of how much I weighed, whether I was thinner or heavier, I always saw my legs in the mirror and thought, this is not what it's supposed to be for ballet. And it impacted my relationship to food and my approach to food for the rest of my dance experience. So from age 14 to like 27, 28, when I stopped dancing, that was a primary concern. And I was obsessed with dieting, and then it did translate into an interest in nutrition, but always from the perspective of like, what do I have to do to lose weight? What do I have to do to be thinner? And it colored my whole dance experience and created this negative space around those things where, as much as there were moments, obviously, in my journey that I was feeling like true joy for what I was doing, that was always looming. And it did create a big motivation for me to want to help dancers not get into that place where it's an overarching part of their experience or journey.
I think that's one of the factors that makes this so frustrating, is that those comments, especially at such a formative age, when you're going through puberty and your body's changing, they don't go away. They stay stuck in your brain for pretty much the rest of your life. You have to really work through that. And, I've heard it in class too, teachers saying, we don't want to develop bulky thighs, we want to be long and lean, not acknowledging that everybody's body is different and people's bodies will change, and that's an okay thing. So I agree with you. I think it's like we have this idea that the ballet world is changing, but really how much has it changed? And so I think while it's frustrating that you went through those things, I think it's really important, the work that you're doing now and how you were able to work through it and kind of reach out and help other dancers. And I know that you've spoken a lot about how there's a need for more just awareness of health, wellness, balanced lifestyle in the dance world, because as you said, it's easy to think nothing else matters outside of dance. So what are some of the most common misconceptions that you see dancers having about nutrition and wellness, or, their own bodies, in your work coaching them?
I think that the biggest thing most dancers do in terms of food and nutrition is to not eat consistently. In an effort to eat less, they will either not really eat breakfast or not really eat lunch. Most of them eat dinner, but it's like there's this conscious or unconscious effort to sort of try to cut things out a little bit. And it comes most often just from the fact that whenever, I think the message we hear the most out in the world of media and social media, and even when you're researching food and body related things, is that if you want to be thinner or you want to lose weight or whatever, it's to eat less and move more. So dancers don't consider that if you're so active and then you're trying to eat less and less, you're only going to be depleted, and or sometimes your body is going to respond by not releasing any fat, so they're eating less and less and their body is like holding on to whatever they've got. And so then they're like, why isn't this working? And so then they look for additional ways to kind of cut back or exercise more and over exercise. And so the consistent eating really is the thing that I think, any dancer who might be listening who's like, I don't know, like, what's the first thing I should adjust with my food or my approach to that? I would say, wake up and commit to eating breakfast, pack yourself a real lunch, whether you have rehearsals or, whatever you're doing in your day, have a good substantial dinner, and then also give opportunities for snacks between the meals, because it really can be that simple, but we kind of try to look for ways to just cut down. And it's just, it doesn't account for what's going to actually support my body to work well. And sometimes dancers justify it to themselves because they're like, well, I'm getting through it all. Okay. And they don't consider that they're really depleting themselves in the process. And even if it doesn't catch up with them within a season, like, it's going to.
And I think that's great practical advice too, because I talk to a lot of dancers who say, I just don't have time, between rehearsals and classes and everything, there's no time to eat like a proper meal. And I think it makes sense what you're saying, you have to just really carve out time for it. And if you're fueling your body with the right things and, not, as you said, depleting it and then craving sugar and then sort of crashing, maybe you have time to, get up an hour earlier and eat breakfast because you don't feel so exhausted.
Right. And, sometimes it is like, how can I more conveniently get in the calories, nutrients, and energy that I need? So it might be to say, okay, if I do have hours of rehearsal midday when lunch should be happening, some companies and training programs have the issue that they just do not provide dancers with the time they need to eat. And it's like, is this done intentionally? It's something to question. If you're not getting a real lunch break, like, why? They need fuel to dance well, or we should all know that by now. But so to, in those instances, maybe pack a really substantial smoothie that has some good fat in it, some protein, right? Like fruit for energy and carbs, and drink that throughout the midday so that you're getting in a lot of energy, even if you can't sit down and like eat a sandwich. But you have to factor in that that's not always as satisfying as when you sit down and actually eat a meal. So you may need more snacks if that's the approach you're going to take to lunch.
I'm glad that you brought up companies as well, because, one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, I know that there's so much pressure in ballet to fit a certain mold or meet very high standards. You've spoken about, worrying about getting fired or feeling like your body wasn't the right fit when you were dancing professionally. So what else do you see that sort of needs to change, or what can companies and studios or even individual teachers do differently to support their dancers and empower them?
I think, awareness and self-education for the people in charge is really important. And not only, I don't think it's as effective for them to just say, oh, I'm going to learn some stuff about nutrition, but rather to seek out dancer specific information, not so that they can then dole out advice, but rather for their own knowledge, so that they're not saying things that are harmful or inaccurate. To go back to some things that teachers say about bodies, right? And like bulkiness and muscles. Teachers will say things, don't use your quad so much when you lift your leg in développé in à la seconde. And it's like, okay, the quad has to be used. And if you're going to say to someone, don't use your quad so much, you need to provide additional information about how we're going to facilitate the lift of that leg without gripping in your quad muscle. And so I think teachers sometimes say things like that because they're like, oh, we don't want to build bulky muscles, or like her quads in their mind, or they're saying this to the dancer, their quads are overdeveloped. It's like,
yes, I've heard that too.
Really? What?
What?
But, and then in other examples, right, I have heard of teachers and or second company leadership saying to dancers, and I say that because a couple of very specific examples come to mind, but I won't call people out in this setting, don't eat so many carbs leading up to the performance. And so you're like, okay, do you want them to be able to perform with energy, like pieces, But, people are going off of dieting trends that they're hearing about. And like, oh, if we want people to lose weight, maybe they should cut out carbs and this and that. So that's the place from which some of this advice is coming. And it's just like, you have to educate yourself about what's actually true and relevant for the health and performance of dancers, and not yourself be following trends or spouting these, 50-year-old ideas about how to do ballet. Because there's even some ballet teachers who know little to nothing about anatomy, which probably shouldn't be allowed at this point. Might be like, don't use your quad at all when you lift your leg. And you're like, well, no, we can't do that, But there are people who are continuing to perpetuate the misinformation without taking a step back and reflecting on the impact of what they're saying, and truly educating themselves in order to be better and more supportive teachers.
This education piece of it on the part of the teachers is so important. This is a problem that I have with barre specifically in general. I remember it was like a breath of fresh air for me the first time I found a teacher who actually explained why we were doing the things we were doing at the barre, and why, what part of our bodies it was helping and how it was, engaging us for when we were performing in center. And I think all of that is so important in just building an appreciation for your body and understanding how it moves and functions, rather than, as we said at the beginning, having this negative perception, like I'm doing all these things wrong. You can understand some of the corrections you need to make and why you're making them, but come at it from a more positive place. Like, this is helping me, helping my body to dance well. And I just think, I think having, educated teachers is so important so that they can educate students to not beat up on their bodies so much. So I think that's a really good point. And I know that you mentioned at the beginning that you coach a lot of adult dancers as well. And that's, the audience for this podcast. So I'm excited to talk to you about that, because I know that adult ballet dancers often, juggle jobs, families, other responsibilities. Sometimes it's the complete opposite of professional dancers, where it's like ballet isn't their whole life, but that can present challenges. So how can they still sort of prioritize wellness in their dance practice when they're juggling all of these things?
I think that, I think it's a good aim for anyone who wants to live a long and healthy life to say, how am I taking care of myself in all areas? And in health coaching, there's this concept of primary food and secondary food. And your primary food areas are career, physical activity, relationships, and let's see if I can remember the last one now, as I'm putting myself on the spot. Spirituality. And then your secondary food is the actual food that you eat, because it's important and obviously it impacts our health. But all of those other areas of life, if they're not in a good place or they're not in a balanced place, or all they're doing is creating tons and tons of stress for you, you're not going to be able to make easy and balanced food choices. And I think if you have this passion for ballet, and being in a ballet class brings you so much joy and energy and inspiration, but then all the other areas of life feel stressful and chaotic and challenging, there's only so much ballet is going to do for you. And so I think it's the same idea, right? Where when you can create health in your career, your relationships, your physical activity, and spirituality, it's going to only all work together to enhance your life. And I'm the kind of coach who, when I'm working with a non-dancer, dancers as well, if someone says to me like, life is good, but my job is just like incredibly stressful and it's all I think about, and I have to work until 10 p.m. a lot of nights in order to get everything done, and I'm losing my hair and I can't sleep and this and that, right? Like, I'm going to say, we need to look for a new job, which I know like some people will be like, that's not an option, but you have one life. And I think that you need to create a life that is worth loving, not just getting through. And so I think that even for adult dancers, right, it's like, you got to look at all of it and say, how can I find the joy or make some big changes so that everything is working in alignment for me to feel my best, get more joy from my dancing, but like have joy in all areas as well.
Yeah, I love that because, ballet is so great for so many reasons, but it's not a Band-Aid. You have to sort of zoom out and find joy in those other places in your life too, to make, ballet fulfilling. So I think, that's important advice. We were talking earlier about changing bodies, and I know for adult dancers as well, who are returning to ballet later in life, they might be sort of overwhelmed by some of the physical demands when their body looks different or feels different than it did, in their teens. So how can they sort of work through that mental struggle and continue to find joy in dance when their body is changing as well?
I think a practical tip that I say to dancers in every stage or phase of a dance journey is to wear things to dance that feel good for you. Some adult dancers who I've worked with have said to me in the beginning, like, I want to be able to wear like the nice leotards that I see some other people wearing. And I believe you can get to a point of putting yourself in that, even if your body doesn't change at all, because I think a lot of that is a mental shift. How do I want to feel? Buying a leotard that fits you well, all of that. And so I think in class to actually wear the things that make you feel most comfortable, whether you go in and maybe you want to wear the leotard, or maybe you're on the opposite end of the spectrum and you just like want to wear a baggy t-shirt. Wear what you feel good in and show up in a way physically that helps you to feel at your most confident. In terms of body change, right? It's loving yourself through the changes and also being really honest with yourself about what might be going on in your life that can be impacting where you're at with your body. And to go back to the example I just gave, right? Like, if work is super stressful and you're spending many hours of each day working and you're not sleeping, like, it's all connected and it all impacts what our physical bodies are able to do, how they look and feel, and all of that, right? And so managing stress is really one of the biggest things that can impact our hormones and how our bodies are able to process food and how well they metabolize and all of that. So I think that it's, again, like to look outside of the obvious, because sometimes when adult dancers don't feel happy with their physical bodies, I think also, I said other dancers do this too. I need to change what I'm eating. That's what it's about. It's just about food, calories in, calories out. That's all that they think about, and it's all connected. And so to say to yourself, how can I support myself holistically from a health perspective, like looking at all things so that I'm feeling my best in my body. And that's also, you may make those changes and your physical body really might not change that much or at all, but you might just feel totally different in the same body because of changing those other areas of your life or creating an approach that is supportive to your well-being.
Yeah. And that's so important too. It's so much about how you feel and your mental well-being, because you can only control how your body looks so much, and you can drive yourself crazy trying to do that. Yeah. So I think that's good advice for adult dancers. And kind of looking back, based on everything that we've talked about so far, what advice would you give to your younger self during some of your early dance training?
I think I would tell her, the most important thing is to find the joy in what you're doing. And you can improve technically. There's like so much potential for growth from a technical and artistic perspective, fully separate from how your body looks on the outside, right? Like you can do so much, because if I had been less focused on my physical appearance, and for a lot of dancers, I think there's a much greater potential for growth and improvement that many dancers miss out on because we're overly focused on the body appearance and size. And so I would have told her to just focus more on the dancing and the joy of it. I'll tell dancers oftentimes to reconnect to your why, and why you started, or what kept you going and what made you want to pursue it at a high level, or made you want to keep pursuing it moving forward. Because often when we start to fixate on our bodies and our food choices, it's completely disconnected from why we started dancing in the first place and like why we wanted to dance. I don't think any 3-year-olds or 8-year-olds are starting ballet and saying, I want to dance so that I'm skinny. That influence comes later. And so to go back to what was it in the early years that I loved about doing this is going to help you get to a much better mental place with all of it.
Yeah, that's so true. And reconnecting with that joy and that initial instinct to get into ballet helps you so much appreciate what your body can do now as well. We miss so much of that when we're fixated on how we look, and we don't stop to appreciate how well we're actually dancing and how much we've accomplished and improved. So I think that's good to keep in mind. And we looked back. So now sort of looking ahead, you've built this incredible platform over the past decade. You have coached so many dancers on your website. There are all these reviews from people just sort of raving about how much you've impacted their lives and their dancing. So I think it's so important, all the work that you're doing. And looking ahead, what are your future goals for the whole dancer and some of your work in the dance community now?
I want to continue to make an impact. I think that I've had the honor of connecting with dancers in various dance programs and intensives and things like that. And it always feels like really important work, because I think that these messages are still not talked about enough. And dancers, I think, especially in the beginning, it's evolved since then. But I think that there's a skepticism among dancers where they'll say, yeah, but because I'll talk about the importance of your health over your thinness. And they will say, yeah, but this person is so thin and they're getting all the opportunities, And so there's still a lot of work and change to be made. Even with, recent news, this Royal Ballet comment about plus size dancers and changing the landscape of ballet, and the backlash that has come from someone suggesting that dancers not just be the tiniest people we know, but rather to be healthy. So many people are up in arms about such a suggestion that it's just evidence. And I haven't even talked about that out on social media or anything yet, mostly because it exhausts me sometimes to be confronted with it. But it does then invigorate me and inspire me and say, so much more needs to be done. And I feel so lucky and honored also on the individual level with the dancers who I work with one-on-one to be able to change the experience for these dancers, because I have had amazing experiences where they've said to me, I think I would have quit if we hadn't worked together, or I was feeling miserable in my dancing and now I love it again. I think that is, even when it's just on a one-to-one level, and I can only work with so many dancers one-to-one at a time and that sort of thing. But to be able to be a part of that change for an individual dancer means so much to me. And it does make me feel like I know that the work I'm doing is important. And so I'm just going to keep doing it.
It is, yeah. And I'm so glad that people like you are doing this work, because I think, as you said, there's so much in ballet about holding on to tradition. And I think some of it is good. There are traditions that we should preserve, but a lot of it is so toxic, holding on to some of those those old things that don't serve us and have really never served us. And so I think because ballet is rooted in so much history, it's kind of like this big ship. It takes a lot to turn it. And I think these small, daily things, and even not that small, you have a big platform and you're doing big things, but I think that makes such a huge difference in the grand scheme of kind of, moving the industry forward. So I really appreciate you and your platform and all of the work that you've done and continue to do.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I mean, and of course, I'm so happy to connect. And we're coming toward the end of our time. We do have a fun section on the podcast called Petite Allegro. It's just sort of like fun rapid fire questions. If you're okay with that?
Love it. Yes. I'm not always a rapid response, but I'll take a rapid question. I'll do my best.
I always like to start off asking what you always have to have in your ballet bag at every class or rehearsal.
I'm going to shout out Orza Pro Ones. Their ballet flats are literally the most amazing things. I recommend them to everyone. Do you know Orza ballet flats?
No. Yeah, I'm going to have to check them.
Yes. They were created by a former professional dancer, Seth Orza, and that's where the name comes from. But they are shock absorbing ballet shoes. And I've been wearing them for over a year now. And one day, I don't know what was going on in my brain, but I forgot my ballet shoes to teach in. And I had to borrow this pair of flats. And I was like, oh my God, I'm now dependent on these ballet flats. I need them because you feel so much more lifted on your feet and supported. Whereas a lot of ballet flats these days are like socks and nothing to them. And people like that because they're like, oh, it hugs my arch so much. But these shoes look beautiful on people's feet and they provide this shock absorbing support that is incredible.
That's okay. You've sold me because I've been looking for new ballet flats. I haven't liked any of the ones that I've tried. So I'm definitely going to check these out. They're called Orza.
Orza. They're worth the investment. They last a long time because they are some ballet flats are a similar price point, but they're an investment, but they do last. So highly recommend. It's a game changer for sure.
That's amazing. Yeah. Thanks for that recommendation. I can imagine for adult ballet dancers too with the shock absorbing.
Yes, especially.
Yeah.
Plantar fasciitis, if you have things like that, definitely.
That's great. That's a good tip. All right. What's one non-dance activity that brings you joy and balance in your life?
Spending time with my daughter. She's 5.
Oh, how sweet.
And, I don't want to start crying, but she is very much at that age where the things that she says make you remember what's important in life and just be like, what a beautiful little reminder to have around me all the time. So spending time with her is magical.
That is so sweet. I'm glad that you brought that up because we didn't get a chance to talk about how motherhood has impacted your dance journey as well. But that's such a great age too. So much innocence and so much joy and everything.
Yeah.
What's a small daily habit that's had a big impact on your wellness over time?
The thing that I'm most consistent with, I do feel really sets my day up to feel my best and to feel like a good start to the day is eating a good breakfast. Every morning I make time for that. If there's ever something going on where I have to be somewhere super early, I'll pack something. And then even if it's a little later in the morning, I'll have my pretty substantial breakfast because it just makes me feel good and energized. And I think that starting off with a really good balanced meal can prepare you for the rest of your day.
Yeah, I love that answer. I'm the same way. Breakfast is my favorite meal and it really does set your day in motion. So
yeah.
And then the last question I always like to ask is, in a perfect world, what would ballet look like?
I think it would just be really inclusive and we wouldn't have so much concern with the size or shape of someone's body. And we would rather be much more focused on the depth of their artistic gifts and, the things that they have to offer to the world through that. And, on an individual level, I think ballet should just be joyful and fun. Because when you're dancing freely and you're really connected to it, those are the moments that it's really, you feel like yourself transcending, right? It can be otherworldly. Gosh, this feels so good. To know how good it can feel, I think that's one of the things that I think that ballet should be about, that supporting dancers to get to their point of feeling their best in what they're doing and what they're capable of.
Yeah, I think so too. And I love that answer. I want that for the ballet space. And thank you so much for everything that you're doing to help get us there as well. It's been so great to connect with you. I'm so happy that we could have this conversation. And, for any listeners who want to know more or connect with you, where can they find you on social media or online?
Yeah, I'm very consistent across the board. So my website is thewholedancer.com. And then on Instagram, I'm at The Whole Dancer. And I do have a podcast as well, which is The Whole Dancer Podcast. Those are the main areas that I'm showing up these days.
Yes, that's great. That's exciting. Yeah, I love your podcast. I'll link to it and your social media in the show description. And yeah, thanks again for your time. It's been so great to connect with you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. This was really fun.
I love talking to Jess, and I thought she had so many practical and important tips for dancers to have a healthier relationship with themselves and their bodies. I'll include links to her social media page, her website, and podcasts in the show notes if you want to connect with her or learn more. Thanks to everyone who tuned in and to Jess for taking the time to speak with me. I also wanted to let you know that the Adult Ballet Studio has been nominated for the International Women's Podcast Awards this year. Thank you so much to the IWPA team and Everybody Media for the nomination. And thanks to all of you for your continued support of this podcast. It means so much to me. I'll be in London June 16th through 20th to meet some dancers and attend the awards ceremony. So send me a message if you're local and I would love to connect. I can't wait to share more with you about the trip when I get back. And as always, you can connect with me anytime on social media at eBlosfield or on YouTube at eBlosfield91, or send me an email at theadultballetstudio@gmail.com. We'll be back with a new episode on Tuesday, July 1st. And in the meantime, happy dancing, everybody, and see you at the bar.